My name is Dr. Eric Bender. I'm a psychiatrist and I specialize in child-adolescent psychiatry, adult psychiatry, and forensic psychiatry. Thank you all for watching my videos on YouTube. I really appreciate the support and all the questions. I'm going to try to talk about some of the series and movies that you've asked me about, talking about mental health and how we see that depicted by the characters and also in the storylines. So let's start with Ted Lasso.
American football coach Ted Lasso.
You're an American who's now in charge of a football club despite possessing very little knowledge of the game.
Oh! I know that AFC Richmond is going to give you everything they got, win or lose.
Or tie.
Right, y'all do ties here.
Ted Lasso is a show where Ted Lasso, the main coach of a soccer team in England, has got a PhD in positivity. What I really liked about Ted Lasso was certain aspects of mental health were depicted really well. In season 1, Ted had a panic attack in the middle of hearing the owner of the team singing Let It Go from the Frozen soundtrack. And the depiction of the panic attack was really spot on. Suddenly you see Ted with his hands clenched and he's not exactly sure what's going on. And he hears almost like a metallic sound and everything drowns out except for that sound. And he has to get out of the place where he is. Often that's how patients describe panic attacks to me. They're just all of a sudden coming right on. They feel like they're going to die in that moment sometimes. They're not sure what's going on and they can't breathe sometimes. These are symptoms of panic, and panic means you are just frantic. You're not sure what's going to happen and you don't know how you're going to get out of it. And Ted depicts that really well. He exits the room where the singing is and he goes outside, and Rebecca stands there and actually helps him.
It's okay. It's okay. Try to breathe.
I can't. I don't know what's going on. I'm sorry.
It's okay. You're having a panic attack. Just breathe.
Rebecca realizes Ted's a human being, and it's a very nice moment where it seems to dawn on her that she's potentially manipulated somebody that really is human. What Ted Lasso does in season 2 is brings in a psychologist. It's a psychologist who works with the team, but Ted also is involved with the psychologist in terms of treatment. This is the part that I really wanted to talk about because many people have asked me as patients, how do you know how therapy works? I've never done this before. It can be really scary to call a therapist to try to talk about something with someone you don't know. You're really trusting someone with your most intimate feelings and intimate moments. In this season, when Dr. Sharon Fieldstone comes into the team, Ted tries how he usually does to warm up the people, brings her cookies, and she says no, and he's kind of taken aback by that. She tries one and then gives the rest of them back to him.
Ted Lasso welcome wagon has arrived.
Please don't barge in here like that. I could have been in a session.
Oh, right, of course. I'm sorry.
Can I help you with something?
Well, yeah, no, I just brought you a little something for your first day of work.
No, thank you.
Oh, come on now. Just try a little bite, huh?
So she's really holding firm boundaries, which therapists do, and it is somewhat confusing for him. But what is even more realistic is when he does talk to her about therapy and not liking it and being suspicious of it. How he says, I view it with a hefty dose of Midwest skepticism. Those are his words. And I don't think it's related to just being from the Midwest. This is a skepticism a lot of people have. People think, how can the therapist help me? And this person, I don't know this person, I'm just going to pay them. And that's what Ted says. You are paid to care about me or to think about my problems. And the therapist challenges him and says, you're paid for your job, but does that mean you wouldn't be able to coach and care about people if you weren't paid? And of course he can coach and care about people without being paid. He's skeptical about how she can actually help. And he says, first off, you're not even honest. You bill for an hour, but they're 50-minute sessions. So how is that even honest?
How long these little chats you do take?
Sessions typically last 50 minutes.
Okay. But you charge by the hour, right?
That's correct. I take it you're not a fan of this kind of work.
No, ma'am.
Why is that, do you think?
You want the truth?
I'm only interested in the truth, Ted.
Because I think it's bullshit. You don't know me. We don't have history. And yet you just expect me to spill my guts about all the gory details of my life. The fights, the mistakes, my deep, dark secrets.
Most therapists do have 45 or 50-minute sessions, and it's billed per hour, but that's the therapeutic hour. So that's the first thing to understand, that the therapeutic hour is about 50 minutes. Work does go into writing a note in those 10 minutes or some other things that might need to be done. So it's an hour, but the therapeutic hour is usually that 45 or 50 minutes when somebody's sitting with the patient. What is interesting is Ted tries a few times almost to get involved with Dr. Fieldstone in the therapy. He comes in one time and makes fun of a toy that's on her desk, this bird that dips down, and leaves. And then another time, he's also arguing with her and telling her she's dishonest, and that's another time he just doesn't feel like this is quite right. It's not something that's completely comfortable to him. I found those things happen when I see patients too. Sometimes they're not sure, like, is this really comfortable? This is really strange. They feel like they're going to be exposed for something. Or they'll often tell me, I'm afraid of what's going to come out. And I think that's a lot of what was true for Ted. We find out later that his father had died by suicide, and this is obviously very traumatic to come home and find your family member dead at their own hands. And he doesn't want to face that trauma, or can't. And ultimately he does come into the doctor's office and sit there in the dark.
Are you okay?
I want to make an appointment.
In Ted Lasso, the relationship between Dr. Fieldstone and Ted is very unique. It's unique for a few reasons. First of all, Ted has that effect on people, finding ways to really connect with them. At first, he's really uncomfortable because he doesn't seem to connect with her. She has these boundaries that therapists have. Therapists have those boundaries on purpose because we don't want to burden our patients with information about us. What's interesting with Dr. Fieldstone is she has that accident on her bike, and you see Ted go to her house. That would almost never happen. You would not see a patient go to a therapist's house unless there might be a therapist who has a home practice. Think of Jason Seaver on Growing Pains. He was the dad, and he'd come out and have to yell at his kids to be quiet sometimes, but usually you don't go to your therapist's home. What's interesting is, did Sharon invite Ted into that space knowing that this was a way that he could trust her? Because you are trying as a therapist to help your patients feel like they can trust you, and you need to be genuine. With Ted visiting Dr. Fieldstone at home, he sees and understands a little bit more about her life, and she questions whether she can do certain things. And given that he's the king of positivity, he starts to help her a little bit, or so he thinks, but there's a trust built here, and now she's allowed him to come into a space where he feels that he can trust her. Therapy is a long process, and also patients can get attached to therapists. When Dr. Fieldstone's leaving, you see Ted Lasso angry with her when he's in her house.
But Ted, you knew I was leaving.
Yes, I did, but I thought I was at least going to get a chance to say goodbye to you. I mean, my wife left me, my dad left me. You, more than anyone in the world, knows how I feel when I get abandoned. And you just left.
I wrote about that. It's all in the letter I left for you.
The letter.
What that is there's a connection that's been built, and it's a relationship that's going to end, and there's a loss there. So you can process that in the therapy. She was leaving and didn't really have the time to do that, so she wrote him a letter, but it's understandable that he was angry. Again, highly unusual for him to go into her house and be there in that space, but it is a nice connection that you see. You would not, however, then go play pinball and drink beer with your therapist. That's just not part of the real life landscape. But what I also like is that this shows how the therapist was willing to see, okay, what does this patient need to be comfortable with me? How can I provide that? Is it still within the boundaries that are okay? It's in the boundaries of the show because she's also a team psychologist. Some professional sports teams do in fact have psychologists. People are moving in that direction. And it's not just for performance, there are also things that come up for athletes. Athletes are human beings, so anxieties or depression or traumas. So a psychologist can help team members deal with that. Dr. Fieldstone came in and talked to Danny, who had unfortunately kicked a ball and hit an animal and really was struggling with that. She was able to sit with him and talk with him. Dr. Fieldstone was helping people with performance here, but she was also very concerned about who they were, how they functioned, and she did a good job of portraying that while also having these boundaries up. Her style might not fit for everybody, but having a chance to sit, feel what it's like with her, that's really important. In Ted Lasso, we really see how that develops. At first, there was not this fit with Ted and Dr. Fieldstone, and then over time it developed. And that's true in therapy to see that. I really like how Ted Lasso showed that these athletes have their own challenges. So Danny, having killed a dog, and his canine crime, feels really traumatized by this. And so he does seek out some therapy. In addition, you see Ted with his own traumatic memories of his father's death and also dealing with his divorce. That's what sparked that first panic attack in season 1, and it is really debilitating to him. So we saw that even the coach has some issues with emotional challenges. I also liked how Danny felt so much better after many sessions with the therapist. Not everybody feels that way. In fact, therapy can be a really long procedure. Some of my colleagues liken it to making sausage. In the end, you see something, but it's a really messy process for a long time. The writers did a really good job interweaving the traumatic tales that Rebecca and Ted were telling at the same time.
I even remember the date.
Rebecca was recounting how she came upon her father at home having an affair, and she discovered that as a child. At the same time, Ted is telling Dr. Fieldstone about finding his father when he had died by suicide. And the way they interwove these stories was remarkable because that is how stories are told by patients often.
Nick a bottle of wine from your drinks cabinet, and as we opened the door, I heard bang. So we went to investigate.
I opened up the door and there it was.
They recount something and how it has woven into the pattern of their life now, how something has occurred to them and how it's shaped them and how it's molded them. And we could clearly see that Rebecca was shaped by this, and the relationship with her father was really not what she wanted because of this, and he ignored it. He never said anything to her. And then obviously Ted didn't have a chance to say anything to his father again. So it was a real nice mirroring and a nice parallel between what was going on for each of them and how it really did shape their lives in different ways. After they have their session where she is listening and he tells her about his father, he does seem to feel better. And what I also like is that it's not one session, suddenly he's cured. This is not Hollywood therapy where it's one time and you're done. Nate is another character who has his own experiences with his father that are challenging. His father really never thought he was enough. We hear that because of the way Nate depicts his father, talks about him. We also hear this because we see Nate sitting with his father. When Nate has made really good decisions in the game and won a soccer game and he's in the newspapers, his father's totally ignoring those parts of the paper, not even taking any interest in Nate's life. He's often bullied Nate, making comments about him, letting him know things weren't good enough, that he needed to do more. And you suddenly see, over the course of season 2 especially, Nate doing the same thing to Colin, doing the same thing to Will. He's bullying them in ways, saying they're not good enough, saying you're not doing enough here, you need to do more, what are you thinking? He's actually becoming a version of his own father towards these other people. And it's pretty awful to watch.
Hi, I've got the suit Ted bought you back from the dry cleaners.
Oh, it's my suit. The second Ted gave it to me, ownership transferred, and it became my suit, Will.
Right.
What you also see by the end of season 2 is Nate starts to have these gray hairs in his head, almost signifying some kind of a change. It's almost like the Emperor and his scars from Star Wars, where suddenly he's this really bad person, he's marked by it. You see those same kind of streaks in Nate. He's clearly not scarred on his face, but he's scarred emotionally and he has this new change, this sight that he's different. He really has become a version of his father.
Everybody loves you. The great Ted Lasso, I think you're a fucking joke. Without me, you wouldn't won a single match and they would have shipped your ass back to Kansas where you fucking belong with your son. Because you sure as hell don't belong here. But I do. I belong here. This didn't just fall into my lap, right? I earned this.
I know you did, Nate.
Just some things about finding a therapist if you end up looking for one. It really does need to be a good fit. And what I mean by that is, do you feel like you can get from this provider what you need? And does the provider feel like they can offer you something based on what they do and what you're looking for? How do you know that? You might not know that till you spend some time with the therapist. Sometimes people will offer their first session free of charge just to see if it's a good fit. And then they might add that session on. If you decide to work together, you can pay for it later. You can also look at it kind of like dating. You know, do you feel comfortable with the person? Do you feel like you understand them and how they might work? And is there a path to what's ahead? Do they understand you? Doesn't always work the first time around. So if you don't find somebody right away, try to keep at it. I really encourage you to do that. In Ted Lasso, we really see how that develops. At first, there was not this fit with Ted and Dr. Fieldstone, and then over time, it developed. And that's true in therapy, to see that.